Okay, so our first theme for tonight is communication, and let's start with a quick poll. Who here considers her or himself a technologist? Raise your hand. You have to raise your hand, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who considers yourself not a technologist, non-technical? Okay. Great. Okay. It's a good mix. Okay, so let's talk about language. Now, I don't mean programming language. Who here has ever felt like you were speaking a different language when talking to a member of the other group? Yeah? Okay. Great. Yeah. So I have as well. Data science, we actually speak a third language. Data science doesn't always speak the same as engineering or business. But anyway, that's aside. Lucille, let's start with you. How important do you think it is that members in your organization be bilingual and speak both business and tech? How far down in the organization do you need to go where that is important?
That's great. You're really lobbing me a softball here because this is right in my wheelhouse, mainly because of the client-facing nature of my responsibilities. So if I don't instill a culture where we can understand truly from a business point of view what our clients need and make sure that we're building technology towards fulfilling those needs, we're nowhere. Which again is a bit of a paradigm shift from the historic way we used to build technology that's completely shifting around now under my leadership. But what's very important, how do you apply, we're all engineers, or a lot of us in technology are engineers, how do you apply an engineering discipline to be able to start to map out what are the various services that the businesses have to varying degrees of detail? So, and actually I'm looking, there's a couple of guys in the room that actually work on, and part of my group is an entire business architecture group. And what we've done is mapped across all of BNY Mellon, again, across all the products and services, how do we start to create diagrams, engineering diagrams, to talk about it from a business point of view. Now, why are these important? First of all, I'm just generally visual. I like everything. Somebody comes and tells me a problem, I'm like, throw it on the board, right? But these visualizations can actually be things that business and technology folks can actually collaborate upon. So we're trying to explain a new problem. What services does that problem affect? How are we going to take already existing services and cobble them together for new solutions? These diagrams become kind of the lifeblood of that conversation. Now, another thing we're doing is, again, taking now the view of the client. We take these very same services and we reassemble them by the different client market segments that we have. So instead of having a BNY Mellon view out, it starts to be a client view in. Now, some of those things may be BNY Mellon services. Some of them may be nothing that BNY Mellon does, but things that our clients need to do. So again, taking the purview now of building technology for them, they think they have things they do with us, plus other things. How do you start to connect the dots? How do you start to build technology to make them more efficient? Because we really have a view of where their overall responsibilities and needs are, and building those technologies to make that come together more efficiently with them. So I like to say that I'm part of my role as an evangelist of this concept. And all across BNY Mellon, in the various business lines, we're taking this business architecture and starting to have conversations. And it's our way of bringing the business a little closer to the way technologies see things as engineers. But it's also instilling in the technologists the language, the process views from the business. And it's kind of bringing that all together. And so far it's going very well. Now, BNY Mellon overall is a firm of 55,000 people worldwide. So it's going to take us a while to get the evangelism out there, but it's going very well so far. And I think over time, it'll help us be more nimble because we'll all be talking in the same language.
So I thought you might say that, the bilingualness is necessary down to a point, but at some point you have engineers who just don't need to know. But that's not what I'm hearing. You're saying all the way down.
No. What I've generally found is when we take engineers and we don't explain to them, I'm big about context, right? So here you're trying to either automate a process or come up with a solution. You need to know the context of what's about that, around that. And that's part of what we're really trying to re-educate our engineers about is don't just look at the problem itself, look at it in the context of what the dependencies are around it. That's how we're really going to build great solutions. Make sense?
Yeah. Great. Now, Camille, I know this is a theme that's also close to you. You've written on your blog that if the CTO, specifically about the CTO, if the CTO does not have a seat at the executive table and does not understand the business challenges that the company is facing, that there's no way that he or she can guide the technology to solve this problem. So I'm interested in hearing from you about your specific transition from technologist to tech leader and what that entailed and what new skills and insights you had to learn along the way.
Sure. So, when I worked for Goldman, we called this commercial. Are you commercial or not? Do they say that at the other financials? Yeah, I figured. Actually, though, it was that kind of thing where the minute that I started working for Goldman and they started saying that, I was like, yeah, I get that. Understanding what the business is about, where I had worked in tech companies where it's all about technology, and I was actually missing that context. And so I've always been interested in understanding the context in which I'm building my software. It's always been something that's been really interesting to me. But I think that there are a lot of people that think, maybe not a lot, but there's certainly a theme running through a certain part of the technology industry right now where the CTO is like the best engineer. There's this idea that the CTO is the best engineer, which is not true pretty much ever at all. I was actually on Twitter yesterday. One of my friends tweeted that she wanted to create a Tumblr that had code snippets on it, and it was called CTO or intern. And you would just, post code snippets and be like, was it written by the CTO or was it written by an intern? And, yeah, because you know what? Like, CTO's job is not really writing code. Maybe if you're talking about a 10-person startup where the CTO is the co-founder and everyone's doing everything all the time. But, do I write code? Very occasionally. Yes, I do. Do I write code for production? Only accidentally. That happened about 6 months ago. It was an accident. Fortunately, it all turned out well. The job of a CTO is to be thinking about the technology strategy, to be thinking about the technology in the context of the business and bridging that gap with the technology team, bridging that gap with other peers on the business side of the organization, and just creating an organization where technology has that seat at the table, where technology is driving the business, and again, as I said in my intro, like creating those possible futures, enabling those possible futures for the business. And it's not really a role about like caring about the nitty-gritty details about how are we plumbing this thing into RabbitMQ, and is it, what if we don't have back pressure enabled? Oh my God, the services are going to die. And it's like, that stuff is fun, and actually I really like doing it, but that's a secondary part of my job. That part of the job is really for my team to do, right? They've got to get in those details, think about the software, thinking about the technologies, make the best decisions there. And I've got to think more about like the high level. Where are we going in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? How do my engineers know where we're going from a technology perspective so that as they're implementing all of these amazing product ideas that we have coming up, we want to add this new type of thing to rent, we want to add this new type of product, that they're constantly thinking about, okay, I know this product idea, but I also know that the vision of Rent the Runway's technology is moving in this direction, because as long as we're moving in this direction, the team will scale better, the technology will scale better, we'll be able to do more interesting things in the future. So, I guess it's very similar really to what Lucille has been saying, right? Understanding the context at a very high level, being able to communicate that context very well to whomever you are communicating with, I think is such an important part of being a CTO, and it's something that doesn't get discussed as much as I would personally like it to. Because frankly, if CTO doesn't actually have a seat at the table, if the CTO is in the corner writing code, then other people are making the decisions for the business, not the engineering side. The engineering side has no voice, and that's actually a pretty weak position for us to put ourselves in. So,
to the point, Camille, though, wouldn't you also say when you have a seat at the table, the CTO is also listening to what the technology trends that are going on that may have nothing to do with your industry and how applicable that is to
Absolutely,
where
of
it
course,
goes, right?
Yeah. Oh no, totally. Yeah.
We will get to innovation a little bit later on.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear both of you talk about it, it sounds like you both regard your role as being somebody who bridges that gap and pushes that communication layer down and throughout your organization because you regard it as being so critical, right?
Right.
So Minerva, your turn, with your broad constituency and all these different agencies that you have to work with, I mean, what kinds of communication issues do you encounter? They must be of a slightly different flavor than Camille and Lucille encounter, or are they?
Well, it's interesting because when you talk about the path, I mean, I did start out as an artificial intelligence developer. I was writing in Lisp, and my startup was an AI startup in 1985. And I think that sort of coding background eventually, moving up to sort of system designer, and then, and then going from system designer to then the system architect, and then realizing that I actually wanted to be an architect, pick up, business architecture, data architecture, infrastructure architecture, and then became a CTO. And so I sort of planned out all these domains, but the real reason I think is that I was asking so many questions, was such a pain in the butt that they kept like moving me to a different architecture. And so eventually, I got my very first CTO job, interestingly, at an advertising agency in 1997. Um, and things were happening right around then, and it was sort of the same idea of like, well, now there's this internet thing. It's the mid 90s. How's that going to, it was still like kind of like Mad Men at the time, in the early 90s, and so what was going to be the impact of, the internet on advertising? And so that was really, really key to translating sort of the model and how the model of advertising itself is going to change, and translating that to technology. Um, back then around banner ads and being able to track who clicked on what and stuff like that. Fast forward to now, where basically, I mean, my office is in City Hall. The building has got elected officials and politicians and government officials in it, and one techie. And it's really been fascinating because I try to think about how technology has disrupted all these other industries I've been in. And I was, senior product manager at Palm right around the dawn of the mobile stuff was happening. And so how each industry has been transformed. And I started to think about government as the next industry to be disrupted and transformed and made customer-centric and made responsive through technology and made more efficient and effective through technology. So with that hat on, I think I've been able to be the translator between, why is this technology important to the people of New York? How is this technology going to make a more equal society? How is this democratizing everyone's voice? And so that is my job, every minute of every day, is to translate technology trends to how they impact the lives of everyday New Yorkers. And that's been tremendously helpful. And then when I turn and face, our engineers, I can still do code reviews and say, why did you use that stack, and how come wasn't MongoDB, and why aren't we on Drupal, and all this other stuff. But I accidentally said Drupal in a meeting with some lawyers the other day, and they were like, what is she talking about? But most of the time I remember who I'm talking to, and I switch languages. So I think that's kind of the way that we're trying to cross-educate both the technologists and the impact of what they do, and the elected officials, and how they can use technology to further, our goals to equalize society.
So in all of these cases, it sounds like each of you learned another language, the language of business strategy, or the language of business strategy, or the language of elected officials and how to achieve their ends, and then became translators. Awesome. All right. So shifting just a tiny bit then, Camille, can you share any examples of when that communication went awry?
Yes. So everything about an organization is communication. I think the more that I do this job and the bigger that my company gets, and I get to see this firsthand, it's like when communication, you underestimate how much communication is important. I talk to people from companies of all different sizes, and like at some point there's a certain level of like seniority that you talk to a person, they're just like, I just don't understand why this decision was made. Doesn't matter what company it is. I'm sure every single person in this room has probably had that experience. I don't understand why this decision was made. Why are we doing this? What's going on? I feel like I don't get it, right? So communication is always really hard. But then you can add on the challenge of bad working relationships to make it much worse. So when I first started at Rent the Runway, we were really kind of rebuilding tech at Rent the Runway. So the founders had founded the company. They are, amazing, brilliant women. They are not engineers, and they didn't really realize the scope of the technology that they would need to create a really successful product. So they kind of thought, well, maybe we can outsource it. Okay, maybe we can just have like a couple of developers. We just need a website up, right? Well, again, we have the largest dry cleaner in the United States. You can imagine there's a lot more than just a website behind Rent the Runway. And so for a long time, the relationship was actually not very good. So there was sort of the tech team versus the business. And, requirements would sort of get thrown over the wall to the tech team, and they would try to implement something, and inevitably it would not be perfect, and there would be just these disagreements. And the team had sort of turned really into this very much us versus them attitude, and it was actually really kind of unhealthy. It meant that like there was a lot of unhappiness and a lot of mistrust around the organization. So even when things were communicated well, and by the way, they were not always communicated well. I mean, there were times when like you would have a developer sitting there and someone standing over their shoulder being like, no, this, no, that. And that's not a healthy communication either, right? So there was no trust from either side, and it made for an unhealthy company in a lot of ways. So a lot of what I had to do in my first really year and a half at Rent the Runway was, how do we make it us? How do we get away from this us versus them, the business versus technology, and just be like, look, we're us. We're all one Rent the Runway. We're all one company. We've got to make this work as a company. And I think that, that was really important to me because, frankly, sometimes this happens a lot in finance. In my experience was like, tech is treated as a cost center. It's just like, why do we have so many engineers? That can be really demoralizing to work in. And frankly, that was not what I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in us. So, I think that communication, it's not just about who knows what information, but how do you view the relationships between people in different roles on different teams? And fixing that is really important. And it's actually a pretty common thing for like startups, I think, of a certain size need to go through.